The carriages came up the Mondrel Drive in the last hour of an October afternoon, 3 of them, lacquered black and gold with outriders whose liveries no one in the county could name. Edmund Vane, Baron Mondrel, stood at the long window of his study with a glass of claret going warm in his hand, and he did not at first understand what he was looking at. The light was the particular gold of a Hampshire autumn, low and forgiving, and it lay across the gravel and the bare limes and the stone steps his own grandfather had laid, and it lay across the crest on the lead carriage door. And the crest was not English. He set the glass down without tasting it. He had not expected anyone. He expected, these days, almost no one at all. In the second carriage, behind glass beaded with the afternoon's thin rain, a woman of 27 watched the house she had been carried away from rise up out of the trees, and she did not let her face move. Clara had taught herself that. She had learned it in a colder country than this one, in rooms where a wrong expression could cost a great deal more than comfort, and she wore the stillness, now the way she wore the dark traveling pelisse, plainly and without strain. The house was smaller than her memory of it. That surprised her. In memory it had been the whole world, and the gate at its end had been the edge of the world, and beyond the gate there had been nothing she was permitted to imagine. Now she saw a modest gray manor with a sagging eastern wing and a stable yard gone to weeds, and she felt the old grief turn over in her once, slowly like a sleeper, and then go still again. She wanted that understood first, by herself, most of all. She was coming back, which was a different country entirely. 12 years before, on a morning very like this one, Edmund Vane had stood on those same steps and watched a hired postchaise take his 3 daughters away, and he had not lifted his hand. This is the thing the county would whisper of him for a decade afterward, in the half-sentences that pass for cruelty among polite people, and they would never have it quite right, because they did not know what the morning had cost him, and he had taken care that they should not. What they knew was the shape of it. The Baron's wife had died of a low fever in the spring. By autumn the 3 girls were gone, packed off to a distant relation no one had met, and Mondrel had closed its better rooms and let its acres thin, and the man inside it had become the sort of figure children are worn past on a dark lane. A cold man. A man who had thrown his own daughters away. He had not thrown them away. Yet there is a thing that is worse than the truth sometimes for the man who must live beside it, and that thing is the version everyone agrees to believe, and Edmund had let them believe it because the truth would have been a knife to the very children he was trying to keep alive. So he kept his silence and he kept his grief, and he let the years lay their gray dust over the house and over his name, and he told himself it had been the only road open to him. On most days he could nearly believe it. The lead carriage stopped. A footman in the unnameable livery sprang down and set the step, and the door opened, and out came a woman in deep blue, gloved to the elbow, with a bearing Edmund had last seen in a portrait gallery and never in his own gravel yard. He did not know her. Then he did. The set of the jaw was her mother's, and the eyes were his own, gray and direct, and the recognition went through him like cold water through a cracked vessel. It was Sophia, his middle daughter. Sophia, who had been 9 years old and missing a front tooth when the postchaise took her, and who was now a grown woman descending from a carriage with a crest he did not recognize, and looking up at the house with an expression he could not read at all. Behind her came Clara from the second carriage, and from the third a younger woman, perhaps 22, fair, where the others were dark, who stood a moment with her hand on the carriage door as though deciding something. That was Beatrice. The baby. Beatrice, who had been a year old, and warm against his shoulder on the last morning, and who now regarded the front of Mondrel with the flat, assessing calm of a woman pricing a property she had no intention of buying. 3 daughters. He counted them without meaning to, the way a man counts the fingers of a hand he has nearly lost. 1, 2, 3. All living. All here. All wearing, he saw now, the small particular signs of rank that the county would read at 50 paces. The quality of the cloth, the foreign cut, the jewels that were not paste, the servants who did not hurry because they had never in their lives had cause to. Whatever distant relation had taken his girls, the girls had not stayed poor relations. They had risen. They had risen very high indeed. He went out to them bareheaded, an old man in a coat 10 years out of fashion, and he stopped at the top of the steps because his legs would carry him no further, and the 3 women looked up at him, and for a long moment no one in that yard said anything at all. It was Clara who spoke first. She had decided, somewhere on the long road from the coast, that she would be the one to speak, because she was the eldest and because she alone remembered the morning with the clarity of an adult who had been nearly old enough. "Lord Maundrell," she said. "Not father." The word landed in the cold air and lay there. "We did not ride ahead. I hope you will forgive the discourtesy." The discourtesy, as though she had arrived an hour early for tea. Edmund opened his mouth and found nothing in it. He had imagined this moment in the way a man imagines his own funeral as something that would happen to other people while he watched from a great distance. He had not imagined it would arrive on a Tuesday, in the rain, with his hands empty. "Clara," he said at last, and his voice was not steady. "You are Clara." "I am." She inclined her head the precise degree that courtesy required, and not 1 degree more. "These are my sisters, Sophia Beatrice. I think you will remember them less easily. They were very young." Sophia said nothing. Beatrice said nothing. The younger one's gloved hand had not yet left the carriage door, Edmund noticed, as though she kept one route of escape open behind her. "Will you come in?" he said. It was not quite a question. It was the closest he could come in that moment to a thing he had no right to ask. Clara looked past him at the house, at the sagging eastern wing, and the dark windows, and the door with its paint gone to the grain, and something crossed her face that was not triumph, and was not pity, and was perhaps only the recognition of how small a kingdom this had been, to have ruled their whole childhood. "For a little while," she said. "We have a matter to put before you. After that we shall see." What none of them said in that yard was the thing all 3 women had carried across a continent to say, and the thing the old man had spent 12 years not letting himself imagine he would ever be made to answer for. It hung in the gold light between the carriages and the steps, unspoken, enormous. "Why? Why did you send us away? Why did you not lift your hand? You have been promised a reunion, and you will have one. So stay with me. Because a reunion is not the same thing as a homecoming, and the distance between those 2 words is the whole of this story." The drawing room had been the best room in the house once, and the women could see the ghost of that in it, in the good plasterwork and the marble chimney-piece and the long windows that took the western light. Now the silk on the walls had faded to the color of weak tea, and there was a damp stain spreading from the cornice, and the fire that the one remaining footman built up was too small for the grate. They sat. A maid brought tea in a service that did not match, and her hands shook, and Edmund saw his daughters see it, and he felt the shame of his reduced house settle over him like a wet coat. Clara took her tea and did not drink it. "I shall be plain," she said. "Since plainness will save us all a great deal of time, you will want to know where we have been. The county will want to know more. So I shall tell it once, and then we need not speak of it again." She set the cup down. "The relation to whom you sent us was our mother's cousin, a woman we had never met, who lived in a principality you have likely never troubled to find on a map. She was childless. She was also, as it happened, the widow of a man of considerable standing at a small court, and she had the ear of people who mattered there. She took 3 frightened English girls off a packet boat and she raised us, and she educated us past anything this county could have imagined for us, and when she died, she left us not only her fortune, but her connections. Sophia married into the ruling house 4 years ago. Beatrice is betrothed to its heir. I myself," and here for the first time, something flickered at the corner of her mouth, gone before it could be named, declined to marry anyone, and so was given the management of the late princess's estates, which I have increased by 1/3. We did not come back to you as the daughters you sent away. I want you to understand that, before we say anything else. It was a great deal to take in, and Edmund took it in slowly the way a field takes in rain after a drought, in patches. With much running off crowns, he said, foolishly. He had seen the crests. He had not let himself read them. "Coronets, properly," Sophia said. It was the first time she had spoken, and her voice was lower than Clara's and harder. "But yes, the county will say crowns. Let them. It will sting you more, and you have earned the sting." "Sophia," said Clara. "Without heat, he has," Sophia said, and looked at the fire. Beatrice had drifted to the window and stood with her back to the room, looking out at the drive where the carriages still waited, the horses blanketed against the cold. She was the one who remembered nothing, who had been told the story rather than living it. And she had come, Clara knew, less out of grief than out of a cool curiosity, to see the man who had become a cautionary tale in 3 languages. "There is a portrait missing," Beatrice said to the glass. "Over the chimney-piece. You can see where it hung. The wall is darker there." Edmund did not turn to look. He knew which portrait. "Your mother," he said. "Where is it?" "In my study. It has hung there for 12 years. Beatrice turned then, and her fair face was unreadable. "How convenient," she said, "to grieve her in private, while sending away every living piece of her you had left." And she said it lightly, almost pleasantly, which was somehow worse than if she had wept, and Clara saw their father absorb it the way a post absorbs an axe, without falling, with only the deep, dull sound of the blow. This was the second voicing of the thing, though none of them counted it. The county had said it for 12 years, now his own youngest had said it to his face, a man who grieved in private and threw his daughters away. And the terrible part, the part Clara alone suspected, and would not yet let herself believe, was that the old man did not defend himself. A guilty man explains. An innocent man protests. Edmund Vane did neither. He sat with his hands open on his knees and let the blow land and said only, after a long time, "You are right to think hard of me. I will not ask you to think otherwise." Into this, then, the second carriage's matter, intrude it, because there was a practical reason the 3 women had come, and Clara had not crossed a continent only for the cold pleasure of looking at her father's ruin. "There is the estate," Clara said. "Mondrel, the entail." Edmund's head came up. "You have no son," Clara went on, in the level voice of a woman reading a ledger. "On your death, the barony and this house passed to your cousin's son, Mr. Bulgrey Halloran. I have made it my business to learn about Mr. Halloran. He has debts in 3 cities, and a temper that has cost him 2 friendships, and a duel he was fortunate to survive. He intends, when Mondrel is his, to strip it, sell the timber and the good land, pull down the house for the lead and the stone, and let the village that depends on it go to the parish. I have this from people who would know." She paused. "We did not come back for you, Lord Mondrel. I want that understood as well. We came back for the house, for the village, for the people. Your name is still, whether you deserve it or not, responsible for. We have the means now to do what you could not, and we intend to do it. We came to tell you that we will be settling here, at the Dower House, which I am informed is the one part of this estate the entail does not touch, and that we will be standing between Mr. Halloran and everything he means to ruin. We did not ask your permission. We are telling you our intention." It was, Edmund understood, a great act of mercy dressed in the cold clothes of a business arrangement, and he understood, too, that the clothes were necessary, that his daughters could not afford to come to him in any garment softer than this, and he bowed his head and accepted it as such. "The Dower House wants a new roof," he said. "I have not had the means." "We have the means," said Clara. "Then it is yours, all of it. Whatever the entail permits me to give, I give." He looked up, and for one moment the mask of the cold baron slipped, and what showed underneath was so naked that Sophia looked away from it. "I am glad you are alive," he said. "Whatever else you take from this house, take that. I am glad you are alive, and I am glad you are what you are, and I had no hand in it, and I know I had no hand in it. That is the whole of what I have. There was a man among the outriders that the women had brought with them, and he was not a servant. Though he had dressed as plainly as one for the road, Clara had been careful about that. He had come at her invitation ostensibly as a man of business attached to the late princess's estates, which he was, but he had come, in the truer account that Clara kept only in the privacy of her own breast, because she had wanted him to see Mondrel and to see her in the place she had been made and unmade. And she had not examined too closely why his seeing it should matter to her. His name was Mr. Nathaniel Reeve. He was an Englishman of 39 who had gone abroad young and made himself indispensable to a court that valued competence over birth, and he had gray eyes that missed very little, and a way of standing entirely still when he was thinking that other people often mistook for coldness. Clara had not mistaken it. She had watched him for 3 years across council tables and ledgers, and she knew that the stillness was the opposite of coldness, that it was the look of a man holding a great deal in check. He came to her that first evening in the cold gallery of the Dower House, where she had gone to be alone with the smell of disuse and the long row of Mondrel faces watching from the walls, and he stood a little apart from her, as he always did. And he said, "You have not eaten today." "I am not hungry." "That is not the same thing." He did not move closer. He never moved closer than he had been invited, and she had never invited him, and the distance between them had become its own kind of architecture, a room they both lived in and never named. The roof can wait until morning. You cannot mend a house and starve at the same time. One of the two will win, and it will not be the house. She almost smiled. It was the nearest he came to tenderness. This arithmetic of her well-being, these small flat commands that any stranger would have heard as presumption and that she heard, because she had learned his grammar, as the only language in which he permitted himself to say the thing he would not say. "Mr. Reeve," she said, "why did you come?" He was quiet for a moment. The candle she had brought guttered in the draught, and the painted Mondrels leaned out of the dark. And somewhere in the old house a beam settled with a sound like a sigh. "You asked me to," he said. "That is not the same thing," she said, giving him back his own words, and she saw it land, saw the corner of his stillness move. "No," he agreed, "it is not." And he left it there, because she had not invited him to leave it anywhere else, and he wished her good night and went. And Clara stood alone in the gallery with her heart going faster than the cold could account for, and she pressed her gloved hand flat against the cold plaster of the wall to steady it, and was angry at herself, and did not eat, and lay awake. The county did not take long. By the end of the week all of Hampshire knew that Lord Mondrel's thrown-away daughters had come home as foreign princesses, and the drive at Mondrel, which had not seen a visitor in years, filled with the carriages of people who had cut the Baron dead in the assembly rooms for a decade, and now discovered an urgent wish to renew the acquaintance. The Dower House roof went on. Clara received the county with a courtesy so exact it was its own form of judgment, and she watched the same women who had whispered of her father's cruelty now exclaim over the romance of the daughter's return, and she understood that a crowd will worship whatever it had meant to stone, given only a change in the light, and she trusted none of them. Among the visitors came Mr. Halloran. He had heard, of course. A man with debts in 3 cities hears very quickly when an inheritance he has been counting on acquires 3 wealthy and determined defenders. He came in a coat too bright for the country and a manner too easy for the circumstance, and he made his bow to the sisters in the faded drawing-room of the great house with their father sitting gray and silent by the fire, and he said, smiling, "I confess, I had expected to find the famous princesses rather grander. And then one hears such things. The county does love to embroider. 3 little girls sent off to be raised on charity, and now we are to believe they sit at the right hand of kings." He let his eyes travel the shabby room. "It is a charming story, I hope, for all our sakes. It is also a true one." This was the 3rd voicing, and it was the cruelest, because it was the most public delivered, before the assembled callers who had come precisely to feast on whatever scene might offer itself. Sent off to be raised on charity. The whole county had used that phrase, or its cousins, for 12 years. And now the heir presumptive used it to their faces, in their father's house, with a smile. Sophia rose. There was a quality to the way she rose that stopped the room. "Mr. Halloran," she said, "you will find the documents of our standing lodged with my solicitor in London, who will be glad to satisfy your curiosity, and who will also, I think, take an interest in the documents of your standing, which I am given to understand make less pleasant reading." She smiled. It was not a warm smile. "We are not little girls, Mr. Halloran. We have not been little girls for a very long time. You would do well to remember which of us in this room has the means to ruin the other, and to remember it before you next presume to wonder aloud whether we are true." Halloran's smile did not entirely hold. He recovered it, and bowed, and said something about admiring spirit, and took his leave. But the room had seen the seam open, and the room was already, in its quick and shameless way, recalculating where the power in this story lay. Edmund had not spoken. He had watched his middle daughter defend the house he had thought himself the last guardian of, and his face had done something complicated. And Clara, watching him, had seen it, and had filed it away with the other thing she was beginning to suspect, and would not yet let herself believe. That night, Clara found her father in his study, where she had not been since she was a child. The missing portrait hung over the desk, and her mother looked down out of it, young and dark and laughing, in a gown 30 years out of fashion, and Clara stood before it longer than she meant to. Edmund sat in the dark and did not light a second candle. "You did not defend yourself to Halloran," she said. "You have not defended yourself to any of us. A man wrongly accused defends himself." "A man wrongly accused has the luxury of being believed," her father said. "I never expected to be believed. So I saved my breath." "Then there is a defense." He was silent for a long time. The candle burned. Her mother laughed down out of the dark canvas. "Sit down," he said at last, and it was the first command he had given her since she had returned, and it was so exactly the grammar of Mr. Blank. Reeve, the same flat, protective imperative, that for a moment she could not breathe. She sat. What he told her then she had not expected, and had rearranged the whole of her childhood in a single hour. After her mother died, he said, there had been letters. Threatening letters, of a particular kind. From a man their mother had known before her marriage, a man of position and no scruple who believed himself wronged by her choice, and who had on her death conceived the idea of pressing his grievance upon her children. Edmund had gone to the magistrates and been told there was nothing to be done until a crime was committed. He had hired men to watch the house, and found that money ran out faster than vigilance, and at last, when a groom was paid to leave a gate unlatched, and a child's pony was found lamed in a way that was meant as a message, he had understood that the only place his daughters were safe was a place their whereabouts could not be discovered, with a relation no one in England knew existed, under a silence so complete that not even the girls themselves could betray it. So he had sent them away with no explanation, because a 9-year-old who knows she is hiding is a 9-year-old who can be made to tell. He had let the county believe him a monster, because a monster who has discarded his children is of no further interest to a man who wished to use those children against him. He had buried the trail in his own disgrace. "The man is dead now," Edmund said. 6 years dead. I might have written to you then. I had the direction. Your cousin sent it to me in confidence. The once when Beatrice was ill, so that I should know she lived. I might have written and explained. I did not. He looked at the portrait. By then you were what you are. You had risen past anything I could offer. I could not see what right I had to walk back into lives that had grown so far beyond the reach of mine. Only to say, it was not, as you thought. Think better of me. It seemed a small and selfish thing to want to be thought better of, set beside what you would become. So I let the silence stand. I have asked myself since whether that was the last kindness or the last cowardice. I have not settled it. Clara sat in the dark, and felt 12 years turn over and lie down in a new shape. She thought of the cold country, and the hard rooms and the slow building of the women they had become. and she understood that all of it had been bought, that the price of it had been a man sitting alone in a failing house, letting his own name rot so that the bough they grew on would not be shaken. She did not weep. She had not wept in a long time and did not know, any more, the road to it. Instead, she put her hand over her father's hand on the desk the first time she had touched him in 12 years, and she felt how thin it had become. And she said, "You should have written." "Yes," he said. "Probably I should." "We will discuss it," she said, "tomorrow and the day after, and likely for a year. You do not get to settle it alone any longer. That privilege is revoked." And she heard in her own voice the cadence of a woman taking command of a thing she had decided to keep, and she was glad of the dark, because her face was not under her management at all. She told her sisters. It was not a comfortable telling, and Beatrice, who had built her whole understanding of her own history on the bedrock of an unforgivable father, did not forgive easily, and said hard things, and went out into the cold garden to be alone with them. Sophia, though, who remembered the lamed pony, though she had never until now known what it meant, sat very still, and then said, "The gray pony. Dapple." They told us he had to be put down. I cried for a week. She pressed her lips together. He did that to keep us, the whole of it. He did that to keep us. And let everyone believe he had thrown us out like ash. And Sophia, who had said her father had earned every sting, put her face in her hands, and Clara held her, and the fire burned down, and the house was quiet around them in a way it had not been quiet in years. The particular quiet of a thing, setting itself slowly. Mr. Halloran did not give up his inheritance for the price of one bad afternoon. He went to London, and he made inquiries, and he found a lawyer of the kind that can always be found, and he came back with a writ. The entail, he claimed, was clean. The late Baron's debts had encumbered certain lands in ways that, properly read, accelerated his own claim. And there was, besides, a question he meant to raise loudly and in company about whether 3 women raised abroad under an assumed protection had any standing in an English court at all, princesses or no. He could not take Mondrel while Edmund lived. He could, however, begin the slow work of making its future his, and he could do it in the assembly rooms and the drawing rooms, where reputations are made and unmade, and he set about it with the energy of a man who has glimpsed the floor of his own fortunes and means to climb off it over someone else's body. The arena he chose was the autumn assembly at Winterslow, the great house of the county, where everyone of consequence for 30 miles would gather, and where the return of the Mondrel daughters would be, that season, the single fact every conversation orbited. He meant to use the room. He meant to raise his question there before the whole county, where a doubt once spoken could not be unspoken, and to make the sisters' standing a thing the neighborhood debated rather than a thing it accepted. It was, Clara conceded when her informant brought her word of it, well chosen. The room had condemned her father once. Rooms like it had spent her childhood deciding what she was. She knew exactly how much could be done to a person in a lit and crowded room by people who would never dream of striking a blow with their hands. "You need not go," Mr. Reeves said. They were in the long gallery again. The roof was mended now. The house smelled of new plaster and beeswax, rather than of damp. And Clara had taken to walking there in the evenings, and he had taken to finding her there, and neither of them called it an arrangement. "Send the solicitor. Let the documents speak. You do not have to stand in that room and be looked at," they will say. "We did not dare." Let them say it. You have nothing to prove to that county. "No," Clara agreed. "But my father does. And he cannot prove it, because the only proof is a story. He will not tell, because telling it now looks like a man buying back his good name with his daughter's fright." She turned to face him. "So I shall tell it for him in that room." 2. That county, the one place it can do him any good. She had decided this somewhere in the last hour, and was only now hearing herself decide it. He spent 12 years letting them think the worst of him to keep us safe. I can spend one evening making them think the truth. It is a small repayment. It is the only one the situation permits. Mr. Reeve looked at her for a long moment, and the stillness in him was very great, and then he did a thing he had never done in 3 years. He crossed the small distance she had never invited him to cross, and he stopped just short of her, near enough that she could feel the warmth come off him in the cold gallery, and he lifted his hand and did not quite touch her face, his fingers hovering at the line of her jaw, close enough that the fine hairs there rose toward him, and he said, very low, "I have stood across rooms from you for 3 years and minded my distance because you had not asked me to do otherwise. I find I no longer have the discipline for it. I want to be in the room when you do this, not as your man of business. Tell me to keep my distance and I will keep it to my grave. I would rather, though, that you did not." Clara did not step back. Her heart was going so hard, she was certain he could hear it. She was aware of every inch of the space between his fingers and her skin, the small, impossible distance that was the whole of propriety, and the whole of her own long-guarded solitude. And she understood that she had built her life as carefully as her father had built his silence, and out of the same fear. That to be wanted was to be a thing that could be taken away. "I am not in the habit," she said, and her voice was not steady, "of being wanted by people who stay." "Then I shall have to break the habit," said Mr. Reeve, "by staying." And still. He did not close the last of the distance, because she had not said the word, and the not closing of it was the most honest thing anyone had ever offered her, and Clara stood in the cold gallery with her whole body, leaning toward a man who would not move until she told him to, and she thought she might break apart with the wanting of it. And she said, "Stay then," and felt his fingers come to rest at last against her jaw, light as a settled bird, and neither of them moved at all. And the candle burned, and 12 years of guarded distance fell away into the small warm fact of a single touch. The assembly at Winterslow blazed. 500 candles, an orchestra hired from Bath, the great rooms thrown open and full of the silk and the jewels and the carefully arranged faces of everyone who mattered. And into this Clara came with her sisters, the 3 of them in the 4 in blue that the county had not stopped talking of. And the room turned to them the way a field of grass turns to a wind. Edmund had not wished to come. Clara had required it. He stood at her side in his 10-year-old coat, gray and upright, and he did not understand yet what she meant to do. And she had not told him because she knew he would forbid it. Mr. Halloran had prepared his ground well. He waited until the rooms were full, and the first dancing done, and the attention of the company at its loosest and most carnivorous, and then he raised his voice in that particular way that is meant to be overheard in a knot of the county's most reliable gossips. And he said that it was a touching tale, the return of the Maundrell girls, but that a prudent neighborhood might wish to know a little more of where exactly they had been, and under what authority they now styled themselves so high, and whether the late Lord Maundrell's well-known abandonment of his children was perhaps a more sensible act than the sentiment of the season allowed. Given what those children had grown into and from what doubtful soil, he had a gift for it. He made cruelty sound like prudence and slander sound like care. Clara crossed the room. She did not hurry. The orchestra had paused between sets and the floor was clearing, and into that lull she walked, in the blue gown with her head up, and the room understood that something was about to happen, and fell by degrees into a silence that ran outward from her, like a ring on water. She stopped before Mr. Halloran, but she did not look at him. She looked at the room. She had stood in rooms colder and grander than this one, before people who could have ended her with a word, and she had learned in them the thing she needed now, which was that a quiet voice in a silent room carries further than any shout. "You wish to know where we were," she said to all of them. "I will tell you, since you have wondered aloud so generously these 12 years, and since my father, who could have told you and chose not to, will not tell you now." And she told them. She told them about the letters, and the man who sent them, and the magistrates who could do nothing, and the watchers whose wages ran out, and the gate left unlatched, and the lamed pony that was meant as a message, and was understood as one. She told them, in the level voice of a woman who has decided exactly how much feeling to permit herself in public, that a father had looked at the choice between his good name and his children's safety, and had chosen without hesitation and without explanation, to be thought a monster by every soul in this county for the rest of his life. So that 3 little girls might disappear so completely that no one wishing them harm could ever find a thread to follow. "You called him cruel," she said. "I have heard you. I heard you as a child, and I have heard you this week. You were comfortable in it. It cost you nothing to despise a man for a thing you never troubled to understand." She let that sit. "He let you. That was the price, and he paid it, and he paid it alone, for 12 years. In that cold house, you all stopped visiting. You are welcome to go on, despising him. You will do it now, however, knowing what you despise." The silence in the room had changed its quality entirely. Edmund had gone white. He had not known she knew the whole of it, had not known she meant to say it, and he stood exposed in the worst way a private man can be exposed, in his own vindication before the very people he had spent a decade letting think the worst. And his hands had begun to shake. It was then that Mr. Comper, Reeve, who had come as he had promised, not as a man of business, crossed the room to stand beside Clara, openly, before the county in the place a man stands who has declared himself. And Edmund saw it, and understood it, and one more piece of his ruined world quietly came right. The room was not yet finished turning, though, because it was Mr. Halloran's habit to fill a silence, and he could not help himself even now, and he said with a smile gone thin and desperate, "A pretty story. And quite unprovable, I think, now that the villain is so conveniently dead." Sophia stepped forward. She did not raise her voice. She drew from her reticule a folded packet of letters, yellowed, sealed, and she held them up, so the candlelight caught them, and she said, "He kept them, every one. 12 years of them in a locked drawer, against precisely this evening, though I do not think he believed the evening would ever come. The hands are known, the seals are known. The magistrate who could do nothing then is dead, but his successor is in this room, and he will be able to do a great deal now." She turned the packet so the nearest gossips could see the seals, and they leaned, and they recognized, and the recognition went round the room in a low hiss, like the first rain on a roof. "Provable, Mr. Halloran," Sophia said. "Everything provable, including, I'm sorry to say for you, the matters lodged with our solicitor concerning your own affairs, which the magistrate will also find of interest. You came here to ask the county a question about us. I think you will find the county now has several about you." Halloran's smile broke. It did not crack cleanly. It came apart at the edges the way such smiles do, and he looked round the bright room for a friendly face and found, in the way of bright rooms, that he had none, that the same crowd that had been ready an hour before to entertain his doubts had already, with the bottomless ease of crowds, moved its weight to the other foot. He said something. No one quite heard it. He left soon after, and his leaving was noticed by everyone, and acknowledged by no one. And within a fortnight he had quit the county for the continent, ahead of his creditors, and was not seen in Hampshire again, but that was later. In the bright room, in the held breath, after Sophia lowered the letters, it was Edmund who moved. He went to his eldest daughter through a crowd that parted for him now, as it had not parted in 12 years, and he stood before her, an old man, undone, and the whole county watched the monster they had invented turn back, in the space of a quarter hour, into a man. He did not make a speech. He had never been a man for speeches, and grief and gratitude together had taken what little gift for them he might have had. He only took Clara's hand, the hand that had crossed the room, and he bowed over it low, the bow a man makes to a sovereign, and he said, so quietly that only she and Mr. Reeve and her sisters heard it, "Thank you for coming back." "We did not come back for you," Clara said, because it was still in part true, and because she could not yet say the rest of it in a public room. "I know," said her father. "Thank you all the same. If their story has stayed with you this far, you already know that the room was never the point. The room was only the place the old verdict had been pronounced, and the daughters had come to pronounce a new one in the same air, and they had. But a verdict is a public thing, and what these three women had crossed a continent to find was something a crowd can never give. So leave the bright room. Leave the orchestra, and the recalculating county, and the empty place where Mr. Halloran had stood. The true end of this is quieter, and it is at Mondrell, in the spring. By spring, the eastern wing had its roof and its windows, and the silk in the drawing-room had been replaced with a paper the color of fresh cream, and the village that had braced itself for Mr. Surt. Halloran's axe had instead seen its cottages mended and its tenancies secured. Under a settlement Clara had drawn with a lawyer of her own choosing, a settlement that bound the estate's future to the people on it in ways the entail had never imagined. The dower house stood full of light. Sophia had returned to the continent, and her husband, and would come each autumn. Beatrice, who had forgiven slowly and then, being young completely, had stayed the winter and learned to know the father she had been told to hate, and had gone back in March to her own betrothed with a different story to carry than the one she had arrived with. And Clara had not gone back at all. She married Mr. Racine. Reeve in the small church at the foot of the Mondrell Drive on a morning in May, with the limes in new leaf and the village in the pews, and her father giving her away with a hand that shook the whole length of the aisle. Not from age this time. There was no foreign crest on the carriage that brought her to the door. She had set the coronet aside, quietly. In the way she did everything. She had estates enough of her own to manage, and a husband whose stillness had turned out to hold, as she had always suspected, a great and steady warmth, and she had found that the country she had been carried away from was, after all, the one she wanted. Now that she had returned to it as herself, and not as a frightened child. On the evening of her wedding, she walked alone for a little while in the long gallery of the dower house, where the painted Mondrells watched from the walls, and a single candle burned the way it had on the first night. Her father found her there. He was carrying something wrapped in cloth, and he set it down on the small table by the window and unwrapped it without a word. And it was the portrait, her mother, young and dark and laughing, lifted down at last from the study where it had hung alone for 12 years. She should be where there are people again, Edmund said. She never did like an empty room. Clara looked at her mother laughing out at the canvas, and at her father's worn hands, smoothing the cloth, and at the candle, and out the window, at the spring dark settling over the mended house in the secured village, and the limes she had climbed as a child. And she felt at last the thing she had not been able to feel in the cold gallery on the first night, the thing 12 years had frozen and one slow winter had thawed. She put her arm through her father's arm. The candle held. Outside, the first of the spring rain began, soft on the new roof, and inside the old house that was not a kingdom, and had never needed to be, the daughter who had returned wearing a crown stood bareheaded beside the man who had thrown nothing away, and let herself, at long last, be home. Thank you for staying to the end. If Clara's return moved you, I hope you will sit a moment in the quiet of it before you go, and carry it gently into your own evening.